The cornet, cornuto, or zinc is an early wind instrument that dates from the medieval, Renaissance and Baroque periods, popular from 1500 to 1650. It was used in what are now called alto capellas or wind ensembles. It is not to be confused with the trumpet-like cornet. The sound of the cornet is produced by lip vibrations against a cup mouthpiece. A cornet consists of a conical wooden pipe covered in leather, is about 24 inches long, and has finger holes and a small horn or ivory mouthpiece. Construction: the ordinary treble cornet is made by splitting a length of wood and gouging out the two halves to make the gently conical, curved bore. The halves are then glued together, and the outside planed to an octagonal cross-section, the whole being bound in thin black leather. 6 front finger holes and a thumb hole on the back, like on the recorder, are bored in the instrument, and are slightly undercut. The socket for the mouthpiece at the narrow end is reinforced with a brass collar, often concealed by an ornamental silver or brass mount. The separate cup mouthpiece is usually made of horn, ivory, or bone, with a thin rim and thread-wrapped shank. Because it lacks a little finger hole at the bottom, its lowest note is the A below middle C, though another tone lower could be produced by slackening the lips to flatten the note. At least 3 existing specimens of bass cornet reside in the collection of the Musée de la Musique, Paris. See external links below. Music for the cornet. Historically, 2 cornets were frequently used in consort with 3 sackbuts, often to double a church choir. This was particularly popular in Venetian churches such as the Basilica San Marco, where extensive instrumental accompaniment was encouraged, particularly in use with antiphonal choirs. Giovanni Bassano was a virtuoso early player of the cornet, and Giovanni Gabrieli wrote much of his polychrome music with Bassano in mind. Heinrich Schütz also used the instrument extensively, especially in his earlier work. He had studied in Venice with Gabrieli and was acquainted with Bassano's playing. The cornet was, like almost all Renaissance and Baroque instruments, made in a complete family, the different sizes being the high cornetino, the cornet, or curved cornet, the tenor cornet, or lizard, and the rare bass cornet. The serpent largely supplanted the bass cornet in the 17th century. Other versions include the mute cornet, which is a straight narrow-bore instrument with integrated mouthpiece, quiet enough to be used in a consort of viols or even recorders. The cornet was also used as a virtuoso solo instrument, and a relatively large amount of solo music for the cornuto, and/or violin, survives. The use of the instrument had declined by 1700. Although the instrument was still common in Europe until the late 18th century. Johann Sebastian Bach, Georg Philipp Telemann and their German contemporaries used both the cornet and cornetino in cantatas to play in unison with the soprano voices of the choir. Occasionally, these composers allocated a solo part to the cornuto. See Bach's cantata O Jesu Christ, Mainz Lebenslicht. BWV 118. Alessandro Scarlatti used the cornuto or pairs of cornets in a number of his operas. Johann Joseph Fuchs used a pair of mute cornets in a requiem. It was scored for by Gluck. In his opera Orfeo ed Eurydice, he suggested the soprano trombone as an alternative, and features in the TV theme Music Testament by Nigel Hess, released in 1983. Playing the cornet. At every stage of its development the cornet was an instrument of professional musicians. The cornet is generally agreed to be a difficult instrument to play. It requires a lot of practice. It embodies a design that survives today in the Russian Vladimir horn or razak. The main tube has only the length of a typical woodwind, but the mouthpiece is of the brass type, relying on a combination of the player's lips and the alteration of the length of the sound column via the opening and closing of the finger holes to alter the pitch of the musical sound. Most modern brass instruments are considerably longer than the cornet, which permits the use of harmonics, the sound being altered by slides or valves to control the pitch. The Baroque era was relatively tolerant of bright or extroverted tonal quality, as the surviving pipe organs of the time attest. Thus the Baroque theorist Marin Mersenne described the sound of the cornet as a ray of sunshine piercing the shadows. Yet there is also evidence that the cornet was sometimes badly played, although it also seems to have been played much more expertly than any other woodwind instrument. Its upper register sounded somewhat like a trumpet or a modern cornet, the lower register resembling the sackbuts that often accompanied it. Cornet intonation is flexible, which enabled it to be played perfectly in tune in a range of tonalities and temperaments. As a result of its design, the cornet requires a specialized embouchure that is, initially, tiring to play for any length of time. Violins often replaced cornets in consort music, and cornets similarly substituted for violins in consort music and sacred music. The cornet and violin were considered interchangeable, and a good cornetist doubled between either cornets and trumpets or cornets and recorders. Cornets were used to reinforce the human voice in choirs, and many commentators suggested that the sound of a well-played cornet, heard at a distance, could be mistaken for a choice castrato. The place of the cornet was never really filled by any other instrument, and it was not until the second half of the 20th century that the cornet revival gave music lovers a chance to hear the sound of this instrument again in its proper context. The cornet and authentic performance. As a result of the recent historically informed performance movement, the cornet has been rediscovered and, as before, attracts the finest players. The violin was the usual substitute for the cornuto in historical music. The recorder, modern B-C, or D trumpet, oboe, and soprano saxophone have all been used as substitutes for the cornet in modern performances.